I was still wearing my office clothes when Dad called. September 2019. 7:45 p.m. I could hear the television in the background, one of those renovation shows he watched religiously, and I knew immediately this wasn't a congratulations call. But this was the pattern that set in. Kyle would share something that lived in a gray space. Something that wasn't quite honest but had the veneer of plausibility. And Dad would validate it. Not just approve, he'd celebrate it. He'd beam with this pride that said, "This is what success actually looks like." In March 2019, I got a call from my brother asking to borrow money. Not a huge amount by the standards of people like us. $200,000. But the casualness of it surprised me. "Just temporarily," he said. There's an audit happening. I need to show liquidity while some paperwork gets sorted." I should have asked more questions. I didn't. I transferred the money that day. Felt like the brotherly thing to do. It felt like my chance to finally be the one who came through. 2 weeks later, my mother called. She was whispering, which meant Dad wasn't supposed to know she was talking to me. "There are people asking questions about Kyle," she said. "From the government. They've been calling clients. Your father doesn't know yet." The government. The actual weight of that phrase didn't hit me until I was back in my car, sitting in a parking garage for 40 minutes before I could drive home. Kyle had been running a Ponzi scheme. Not technically, not quite, but close enough that federal prosecutors weren't impressed by the distinction. He'd been taking money from wealthy clients, promising returns that were, let's say, inconsistent with market reality, moving money between accounts, creating the appearance of profits by using new client funds to pay previous clients. All while my father watched from the sidelines, probably thinking this was just how the game worked at that level. The investigation had been going for 8 months before Dad found out. When he did, he didn't call the FBI. He called a lawyer. A very expensive lawyer. The kind who makes a practice of helping rich people with their rich people problems. And then here's what hit me. He paid the lawyer using money from the family trust. Our family trust. The money Dad had made from his own legitimate business, real estate development, was now being used to defend his son against federal fraud charges. I found out in stages, the way bad news always comes. A piece here, a carefully edited detail there. Never the full picture from my father directly, always from my mother's careful mentions, or fragments from Kyle himself when he called, voice shaking, saying things like, "The prosecutors are being unreasonable, and some of my clients are refusing to testify for me." Then, in May, my promotion came through. Legitimate advancement, 1 through 3 years of impeccable work. I'd been brought in to clean up a disaster in operations. Layers of inefficiency and bad decisions that had cost the company millions. In 18 months, I'd restructured everything. Fixed it. I was proud. Genuinely proud in a way I hadn't felt in years. And my father's response was, "Your promotion is pathetic." Not, "I'm disappointed." Not, "I expected better." He actually used the word pathetic. I drove to my parents' house that weekend. I didn't call ahead. I couldn't have explained what I was doing in a text anyway. It was Saturday morning, early enough that Dad was still in his study with coffee, reading the Wall Street Journal, still reading it like nothing had changed, like the world still worked the way he'd always understood it. "We need to talk," I said. I was standing in the doorway. I hadn't sat down. I wouldn't sit down. He looked up like I'd interrupted something important. In some version of his reality I had. "About your mother's project planning," he said. "Because I think she's..." "About Kyle. About the money. About what you said on the phone." He set the newspaper down slowly. Very slowly, the way someone does when they're buying time to decide how to lie. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You called my promotion pathetic," I said. "My promotion, which I earned. Which came from actual work, actual results. And you called it pathetic. Because I'm not Kyle. Because I'm not the golden child who commits federal crimes." My father's face did something interesting then. For just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, he looked genuinely confused. Like the possibility that he'd made any kind of mistake, any kind of error in judgment, was so foreign that he literally couldn't process the words I was saying. "Kyle made a poor decision," he said finally. "A lapse in judgment." A lapse in judgment? Dad, he defrauded people. Actual people. Retired people, some of them. People he was supposed to protect. And you're paying for his lawyers while you tell me my accomplishments don't matter. You don't understand how these things work, he said. He stood up. I realized then that he'd never stood up. In all my years of difficult conversations with my father, I don't think he'd ever stood up to face me. He'd always made me come to him. There are complexities. There are. Complexities? Dad, he committed fraud. That's not complex. That's a choice he made. And you rewarded him for it. You're still rewarding him. I'm protecting my son. No. You're protecting the image of your son. You're protecting the idea that Kyle is special, that he's better, that he deserves this treatment. But he's not special. He's just the person who was always willing to lie better. I could see my mother in the hallway listening. She was standing still, one hand covering her mouth. My father's voice went very quiet. You're jealous. Of what? I nearly laughed. Of federal crime? Of using family money for a criminal defense? Of being the son my father is ashamed to claim. That last part hit him. I could see it in how his eyes went hard. You know what's pathetic? Paying for the best lawyer in New York to defend your favorite son, and then having the audacity to tell your other son that he doesn't matter enough. I didn't say you don't matter. You did. That's exactly what you said. Every time you paid for Kyle's bail and his lawyers instead of noticing that I was building something, that I was actually succeeding at something. He sat back down. Not in defeat, my father wasn't capable of that kind of surrender, but in something like withdrawal. A conscious decision to stop engaging. I think you should leave, he said. So I did. The trial started in September 2019. Kyle took a plea deal in October. He did 14 months in a federal prison in Pennsylvania. My father paid for that too, in a way. Good lawyers appeals on minor points, a low-security facility. Kyle was released in December 2020 and immediately moved to Colorado. He doesn't work in finance anymore. He works for his father-in-law's construction company now, which is its own kind of punishment, I guess. I didn't attend the sentencing. I heard about it from my mother. She called me afterward, her voice hoarse. He's really gone, she said. And I couldn't tell if she meant Kyle or my father or something else entirely. My relationship with my father fractured completely after that weekend. Not dramatically. There was no shouting match or final severance. We just stopped trying. He'd send emails about family events. I declined them. Once, about 6 months later, he sent me a long message about wanting to move past this and be a family again. But it was clear that what he meant was pretend this never happened and accept that I was right. I couldn't do that. But here's the thing no one tells you about cutting off a parent. It doesn't feel like victory. Feels like erosion. Like you're the one who's diminished. For a while I was angry all the time. Not just at my father but at myself. Why had I transferred that money to Kyle? Why hadn't I asked more questions? Why had I needed my father's approval so desperately that I'd structured my entire life around seeking it, only to finally realize he'd never give it freely? My therapist, and yes, I got one, thank God, pointed out something I hadn't considered. You didn't actually want his approval, she said. You wanted him to see you. That's different. Approval is transactional. It's about meeting someone else's standards. But being seen, that's about being known. Actually known. And my father had never tried to do that. By 2022, 2 years after the weekend at his house, something shifted. Not forgiveness exactly, but a kind of clarity. I realized that my father's actions had never been about me. His inability to celebrate my promotion, his inability to choose integrity over his favorite son, that wasn't a reflection of my worth. It was a reflection of his limitations. He had built his entire identity around Kyle's success, real and imagined. When that shattered, so did he. He just wasn't mature enough to admit it. And I could let that be his problem, not mine. I was promoted again in 2023. Vice President of Strategy. I called my mother and told her. My father got the email from her. He didn't call me. That would have required admitting something he'd never admit. But I didn't need him to call. I knew what I'd done. I knew it was real. Last month I was at a coffee shop downtown and I ran into Kyle. Genuinely, randomly. He was in the city for work, something about a bid on a commercial property. He looked different. Smaller somehow. Not physically, but like something inside him had been reduced. We sat for 20 minutes. We didn't talk about the trial or the prison time or our father. We just talked about life. Normal things. He asked about my job. I asked about his kids. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, which is probably because we weren't performing for anyone anymore. We'd both been released in different ways from the need to prove something. As he was leaving, he said, "Dad still doesn't get it, does he? Like what we're actually supposed to be doing here." "No," I said. "I don't think he ever will." Kyle nodded. He looked sad. I wasted a lot of time trying to give him what he wanted. "Yeah," I said. "So did I." Here's what I've learned from all of this, and maybe you've learned it too, either from a parent, a boss, a partner, someone whose approval felt like oxygen. The people who matter most are rarely the ones demanding the most from you. The people who actually see you are usually the ones you don't expect. A good therapist. A friend who asks questions because they genuinely want to know the answers. A mentor who celebrates you without needing to own your success. And sometimes, and this is the part that took me longest to understand, the people who raised you are just people. Flawed, limited, trying their best with the toolbox they were given. That doesn't excuse their choices. It doesn't mean you owe them forgiveness or contact or anything else. But it does mean their failure to see you is about their capacity, not your value. If you've ever felt invisible in front of someone you needed to matter to, you know this already. You know how it feels to perform excellence and have it dismissed. To work harder and try more and still come up short against an impossible standard. You know how it feels when you finally stop trying, and how both lighter and lonelier that feels all at once. That's the real thing. The loneliness doesn't go away when you set the boundary. It just changes shape. It becomes the loneliness of independence, which is different, quieter, more honest. And I'll take that trade every single time.